Thank you again for being on time. My name is Ed Davies. I'm the president of the Jakarta Foreign Correspondents Club and a journalist with Reuters. I'm extremely pleased to welcome you here today for a talk with Ambassador Sung Kim. Some of you may recall we also spoke with Ambassador Donovan back in 2019 when the US and Indonesia marked 70 years of diplomatic ties. Given the pandemic, that does feel like a world away. Just a little background on Ambassador Kim. He took up the Indonesia post in October last year, but in May was also tapped by President Biden to serve as the US Special Representative for the DPRK. He also served as Acting Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs between January to June this year. Previously, he served as Ambassador to the Republic of Korea and Ambassador to the Philippines, and in between was the Special Representative for North Korea policy in Washington. He was born in Seoul and grew up in Los Angeles. He studied at the University of Pennsylvania, Loyola University, and the London School of Economics, and has honorary doctorates from the Catholic University of Korea and the Holy Name University of the Philippines. Ambassador Kim, who is a father to 2 daughters, worked as a prosecutor in LA before joining the diplomatic service. So the relationship between the United States and Indonesia is clearly one of the most important in the region on so many fronts. So I think without further ado, I'd like to open the floor to the ambassador.
Great. Thank you very much, Ed, for that kind introduction and inviting me to speak to this forum. It's a great pleasure for me to join you virtually for this speaker event. As many of you know, it's been almost a year for me as the U.S. Ambassador to the Republic of Indonesia. And what a year it has been, full of ups, downs, and everything in between. We witnessed a change of administration in the United States. The U.S. rejoined the Paris Climate Accord, while climate-related environment disasters continue to afflict people around the globe. And of course, we saw the development and dissemination of new COVID vaccines, just as new COVID variants spread across the world. Undoubtedly, life in the time of COVID is difficult for everyone. In one way or another, we all have experienced loss. But I believe in the process, we have gained something valuable too, resilience and hope. In the course of the past year, I have been incredibly impressed with the dynamism, dedication, and passion of the people of Indonesia, who embody the spirit of resilience, so important to all of us. Healthcare professionals, educators, journalists like yourselves, national and community leaders, and other amazing Indonesians who have done so much to bring their country forward during these difficult times. For someone like me, who is supposed to be out meeting people all the time, I have to admit, I haven't met as many people as I wanted to, or visited nearly as many places as I would have liked. Hopefully we will get a chance to do that soon. And I mean that. I really am truly full of hope. And let me share why I remain so optimistic. First, the United States is committed to leading the response to the COVID-19 pandemic globally. And we are seeing proof of that right here in Indonesia. The US this month donated 4.6 million doses of Pfizer vaccines to Indonesia in partnership with COVAX. This is in addition to the 8 million doses of Moderna vaccines we contributed earlier. And President Biden announced just last week that the United States will donate an additional 500 million Pfizer vaccines to low and lower middle income countries, bringing the total number of US vaccine donations to over 1.1 billion doses. Besides vaccines, the US has also donated over 1,000 American-made ventilators currently in use in hundreds of hospitals here in Indonesia. To date, the US has provided over $77 million in direct support to Indonesia's fight against COVID-19, building on more than $1 billion in health-related assistance to Indonesia over the past 2 decades. Through the United States Agency for International Development, USAID, the US helps equip Indonesian health workers with the tools they need to stay safe and help others, accelerate case detection and tracking, purchase additional oxygen, enhance vaccine rollout, and provide medical supplies to treat COVID-19 patients and save lives. Just last month, USAID supported vaccinators at over 190 mobile and stationary vaccine sites, immunized thousands of Indonesians in the greater Jakarta area. And on Sunday, I had the pleasure of visiting one of those vaccination centers where I personally witnessed the incredible work being done getting those shots into the arms of Indonesians. I want to emphasize that these donations are made with no political strings attached. The US is delivering vaccines to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, with the singular objective of saving lives. We will continue to support Indonesia's vaccine rollout effort and help Indonesia move closer toward a safe reopening of its economy. One of our proudest partners in this effort is the US private sector, which has been committed to support an inclusive and sustainable recovery from COVID-19 in the areas of human capital development, social and community support, small and medium enterprises support, and in-kind donations of medical supplies and equipment. As we continue to work together to end the pandemic, we must also chart a path to strengthen economic ties during the post-pandemic recovery. Looking at the sizes of our respective economies, it is still surprising to me that the level of bilateral trade is only around $30 billion a year. Indonesia's GDP is an impressive $1 trillion and is poised to quickly recover in 2022 and beyond. There is great opportunity for US companies to contribute to Indonesia's economic growth. Despite the pandemic, foreign direct investment grew almost 17% in the first half of 2021. And we look forward to advancing the shared market opportunities as Indonesia continues to grow. An area where we have strong interest is advocating for policies that support the growth of Indonesia's digital economy, promote innovation, and ensure market access for foreign firms. Indonesia is the largest and fastest growing internet economy in ASEAN, with almost 200 million internet users. The current digital economy is projected to grow from $44 billion last year to $124 billion by year 2025. As Indonesia expands its digital economy, global supply chains will play a critical role, and US firms stand ready to collaborate to deliver high quality, cutting edge technology. As we look to build back better, the US will strengthen its collective efforts to construct sustainable and resilient infrastructure in Indonesia through the Build Back Better World Partnership. President Biden worked with G7 leaders to reach agreement on this values-driven, high standard and transparent infrastructure partnership that can offer recipient communities the long-run benefits, protections, and transparency they deserve. We also stand ready to support Indonesia become a global climate leader and achieve greater climate ambition. We view Indonesia as a key country in the global effort to reduce greenhouse emissions and keep global warming to less than 1.5 degrees Celsius. It is a country that is both a major contributor of green gas emissions and victim to the adverse impact of climate change. The US-Indonesia bilateral climate engagement framework has increased trust and cooperation between our two countries. I'm happy to say that Indonesia has made progress, especially in the forestry and land use sector, when it comes to reducing greenhouse emissions from deforestation. Between 2019 and 2020, deforestation was at its lowest rate in 20 years. Because of climate mitigation programming in agriculture, forestry, and elsewhere, Indonesia saw a reduction of 76 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions from the land use sector, equivalent to over 16 million cars off the road for a year. Indonesia also announced at the second major economies forum on September 17th that it would participate in the joint US-EU Global Methane Pledge that will launch during COP26 in Glasgow in November. Clearly, Indonesia should be recognized for the progress it has made. Along the same line, we believe there is room for Indonesia to do more, room for greater climate ambition. Through Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry and his team, we have engaged with the Indonesian government over the past several months and look forward to strengthening this partnership in the months and years to come. While the pandemic has slowed down much of life everywhere, I can honestly say that diplomacy, especially diplomacy between the United States and Indonesia, has not slowed down a bit. Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi just returned from her second visit to the United States in as many months, where she held a series of important discussions with leaders in the American private sector to encourage greater investment in the Indonesian economy, particularly in the health sector. During her August visit, the Foreign Minister and Secretary of State Blinken held the first US-Indonesia strategic dialogue, where they discussed a range of critical global and regional issues. The Foreign Minister's visits are just the latest in a series of high-level engagements we've had between our two countries. This month, we were pleased to welcome President Jokowi to 2 US organized summits to help organize a global response to address climate change and the COVID-19 pandemic. Naturally, the United States recognizes that Indonesia plays an important role in promoting peace, democracy, and stability in Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. We share a fundamental belief in democracy and innovation-driven economic growth with our strategic partner, Indonesia. Indonesia is a leader within ASEAN and an anchor of the rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. Indonesia and the United States also share a vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region, including a commitment to freedom of navigation and overflight and other lawful uses of the sea. Our shared commitment to the rules-based international order and to multilateralism has provided unprecedented growth in peace and prosperity in the Indo-Pacific region for over the past 7 decades. Upholding these principles will be essential to maintain stability, resolve tensions, and address challenges. The vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific is based on values that have underpinned peace and prosperity in the region for generations. Open investment environments, good governance, freedom of the seas are goals shared by all who wish to prosper in a free and open future. We are committed to upholding a free and open Indo-Pacific in which all nations, large and small, are secure in their sovereignty and able to pursue economic growth consistent with international law and principles of fair competition. We will compete vigorously against attempts to limit the autonomy and freedom of choice of the Indo-Pacific nations. We will promote democratic governance and transparency and work to uphold our values and the rule of law. We will stand alongside like-minded partners and allies to promote respect for international law, institutions, and values that underpin peace and stability. Key to the achievement of our joint goals is having and enforcing transparency and accountability to promote economic, political, and social inclusion and equal opportunity. Being under the spotlight of the public is essential for a government's credibility in the eyes of its citizens and for encouraging investment environment. The United States is committed to ASEAN centrality and ASEAN's role in the regional architecture. ASEAN's efforts over the past decades have fostered a more stable, prosperous, and peaceful Indo-Pacific region. We respect Indonesia's leadership within ASEAN to develop the ASEAN outlook in the Indo-Pacific and the shared principles enshrined in that document that underpin ASEAN's views for the region. The Biden-Harris administration looks forward to increased engagement with our ASEAN partners. We have submitted proposals to ASEAN to expand our engagement in the areas of health, environment, and climate, energy, transportation, and gender equality. The United States has been a dialogue partner of ASEAN since 1977 and was the first dialogue partner to establish a resident ambassador in Jakarta. We look forward to working with Indonesia in its role as ASEAN country coordinator and Indonesia's ASEAN chairmanship in 2023. This has also been a groundbreaking year for U.S.-Indonesia defense cooperation. I think we have done more this year during the pandemic than we did before it, which is amazing. From the island of Sumatra, the Indonesian and US Air Forces started this summer with the Pacific region's largest fighter aircraft exercise in 2021, COPE West. The COVID protocols and processes established by the TNI set the precedent for all exercises the United States has conducted in the region. These pioneering safety procedures resulted in 0 cases of COVID from all 250 participants. In August, TNI and the US Army conducted exercise Garuda Shield, the largest joint exercise in the history of the Indonesian Army. Held at 3 locations across the Indonesian archipelago, Garuda Shield brought together 1,500 US soldiers with over 2,000 Indonesian soldiers over a 2-week period. This exercise was highlighted by the Pacific Air Force's largest airdrop of the year, with 9 C-17s and approximately 600 US and 100 Indonesian paratroopers. Additionally, we just finished Pacific Airlift Rally, which focused on what may be the highest priority training we do: disaster response and humanitarian aid delivery. During Pacific Air Rally, US and Indonesian Air Force's C-130s and medical teams came together to work on process and procedures for responding to the worst natural disasters we have. Our defense cooperation goes beyond training for potential operations, but also involves real-time cooperation and real-world efforts. Earlier this year, we were humbled and honored to participate in the search and rescue operations for the submarine Nagala 402 and its crew. Our US Navy aviators and submarines immediately dropped everything they were doing to come and assist the Indonesian Navy and their search efforts. It was a heartbreaking situation, but also heartwarming seeing the participating nations come together for a common cause. The sailors and the families of the Nagala 402 are now part of a larger Navy family, and the United States will always be there to support friends in a time of need such as this. Exercises and operations such as these allow our soldiers, sailors, and airmen and Marines to work together with their Indonesian counterparts to improve interoperability, swap ideas for best practices, hone each other's skills, but most importantly, build a lasting trust and friendship between our two militaries. In the coming years, the United States will look to increase our participation in military exercises with Indonesian partners, continue to develop opportunities for cooperation and interoperability, and assist where we can to increase Indonesia's ability to secure its borders and protect its territorial lands and waters. Like the military partnerships we build via our joint exercises, people-to-people ties should always be at the heart of our relationship. One way we maintain those ties is by facilitating international travel. I'm proud to say that our visa operations are functioning at capacity while being COVID safe. We have also made it easier for Indonesians to renew their visas without coming to the embassy. In particular, getting Indonesian students to study in the US is a top priority. I'm pleased to announce that we issued more student visas for this academic year than we did the year before the pandemic. Not only that, we have been able to interview every student visa applicant with enough time to spare them for them to get to campus on time. Reaching out to Indonesians during the pandemic has been a challenge. As safety protocols restricted our public engagements, the embassy has made a decision to move to fully virtual programming via our network of publicly accessible American spaces, including Ad America. Throughout the pandemic, we have offered dozens of programs every month on a range of topics from English language training to education advising to environmental activism and more. The results have been incredible, with our virtual programming reaching not just hundreds, but thousands of Indonesians, something that has not been possible with purely in-person activities. We have also broadened our online recruitment across Indonesia for exchange programs with the United States, because frankly, the demand is strong and growing. The number of applicants for Kennedy Lugar Youth Exchange and Study Program has tripled in the last 2 years. And this year we received a record-breaking 35,000 applications. Of course, we're hoping to get back to in-person exchanges, programs, events, and activities as soon as conditions permit. In the meantime, we're doing everything we can to strengthen the cultural ties that undergird our bilateral relationship. From hosting an education summit earlier this year that increased collaboration between Indonesia and American universities, to partnering with Grand Imam of Istiqlal Mosque to develop an Ad America inspired unit inside the mosque to counter extremist messaging, as well as promoting gender equality, diversity, tolerance, and Indonesia's moderate form of Islam. We're making long-term investments that will help move our partnership with Indonesia forward. I won't try to claim that everything in the US-Indonesia relationship is perfect. Challenges, of course, do exist. And for the next several months, I will be directing our mission's focus on several key areas. First and foremost is my emphasis on moving beyond the pandemic. COVID recovery is still just beginning, and I plan to redouble our efforts towards helping the government here meet its public health goals and prepare for a post-pandemic era. The United States is taking a comprehensive approach to ending the pandemic, mitigating COVID-19's harm to people and societies, and strengthening global recovery and readiness for future pandemic threats. This is a moment that calls for US leadership, and the President has made clear that the United States will lead. As part of this effort, my second priority as ambassador is increasing trade and investment between the United States and Indonesia. I know that Indonesia shares this same goal. My third priority is addressing the climate crisis. climate change is already a crisis and is impacting the planet in unprecedented ways, causing weather and climate events to increase in severity and frequency. With COP26 taking place in November, time for change and action is now. Finally, one of my most pressing concerns is ensuring regional security. The Indo-Pacific is an incredibly important and consequential region, and Indonesia occupies a special place here. No doubt you have heard of AUKUS, an enhanced trilateral security partnership within Australia, the UK, and the United States, which is focused on sustaining peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific. A free and open Indo-Pacific is critical to the security, prosperity of the American people. And this partnership will help defend our interests here for generations. It is especially important given the changing strategic environment in the region. This commitment demonstrates our determination to revitalize our alliances and strengthen them on the challenges, to take on the challenges of the 21st century. So in conclusion, I want to add that it has been an incredible honor for me to serve as the United States Ambassador during this critical time in our relationship with Indonesia. Looking back, I can say that this has been a year of both challenges and successes, and the work we have done together is nothing short of exceptional. The next question to ask is, what will be the next year bring? What will the next year bring? A year from now, Indonesia will host the G20, and then Indonesia will assume the ASEAN chairmanship. The next year will be a pivotal time for the US-Indonesia partnership, but I remain hopeful. This is our opportunity to secure a stable, sustainable future together. Thank you very much. Terima kasih.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that, for covering many topics there. I'd now like to open up to the Q&A part of the session. You may put questions in the chat if you wish, and we've also had some questions that came in ahead of time. So perhaps I could just kick off with, you did mention AUKUS. Obviously, this has caused some concerns in countries like Indonesia that potentially could fuel an arms race and make the region less secure. How do you respond to that, and you know, can you allay such fears?
Sure, thanks very much, Ed. Look, this is a very important initiative, and I think AUKUS will reinforce what we're doing already with Indonesia and other key countries in the region to promote our shared goals, to pursue our shared goals, to promote prosperity, security, respect for human rights, respect for rule of law, to advance a free and open Indo-Pacific. And it will help us protect important rights such as freedom of navigation. I want to make very clear that the three countries have a very strong respect for ASEAN centrality, and we are convinced that through this effort, we will be able to strengthen our cooperation with Indonesia and other countries in ASEAN. As I mentioned in my remarks, Indonesia occupies a special place in the region, and for that reason also, we look forward to working more closely with Indonesia to promote our shared goals for a free and open Indo-Pacific. I'm not concerned about an arms race or proliferation. I think all three countries have a very strong record and commitment to non-proliferation. I think Australia has shown its complete commitment to nuclear non-proliferation. So we have great confidence in Australia's ability to manage any proliferation concerns. I'll also mention that this is not an initiative directed at any particular country. I think this is a forward-looking, positive initiative that will improve the capabilities of our three countries to work together more closely, more effectively with the ASEAN region.
Thank you. I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, obviously, Minister Retno has sort of said before she's concerned about Indonesia getting trapped between rivalries between the United States and China. I mean, does AUKUS increase the prospect of that? I mean, I know recently, for instance, around the Tuna Islands, the Navy told us they'd seen both US and Chinese boats, you know, in international waters, but it was something they were noting. So, you know, is she right to sort of fear sort of Indonesia getting in the middle of all of this?
We are not asking any country, including Indonesia, to make choices between U.S. and any other country. We share important values, important goals with Indonesia. And I think through our bilateral efforts with Indonesia, but through important initiatives such as AUKUS, we will be better placed to work with Indonesia to promote our shared goals, rights, and objectives. So I don't think this is an initiative that places Indonesia or any other country in an awkward situation. I really do believe that this will reinforce our ongoing cooperation with key countries like Indonesia to make sure that we have a free and open Indo-Pacific that respects the rule of law, protects human rights, protects rights like freedom of navigation. So I think this is a wonderful initiative, and I applaud the leadership of the three countries for undertaking this effort.
Thank you. I mean, while we're on the security issue, I know there were some questions sent in around Afghanistan. Not sure if that's something you, it was obviously talking about, US has obviously spent a lot of money and, you know, a great deal of money lost, you know, during this sort of 20-year episode, and also why so many Afghans appear to have been left behind who supported the US actions, given the speed of the evacuation. And a third part of it about the Panjshir Valley and whether the US should be doing more to support elements there. So quite a lot of interest, I suppose, given it's obviously been such a huge story across the region.
Sure. I mean, it's not surprisingly, this is a topic that has been part of our ongoing dialogue with Indonesia on regional and global issues for some time. I think Indonesia has a shared interest with us in seeing a stable and secure Afghanistan, and to hold the Taliban up to their commitments, including freedom of movement for Afghans who want to leave Afghanistan, but also for foreigners, including Americans, who may still be there and want to leave. This is extremely important. In fact, as you know, there's no higher priority for the US government than to make sure to protect American citizens overseas. I think it's also important that we hold the Taliban to their commitment to make sure that terrorists do not use Afghanistan as a base. That's a very important commitment. And I know that Foreign Minister Retno is also quite focused on seeing that follow through. Also important is that the Taliban create an inclusive government that protects human rights for all Afghans, including women and children and small minority groups. So we're going to stay in touch with Indonesia. And I should mention that we deeply appreciate what Foreign Minister Retno has done already. I think she has focused very energetically on protecting the rights of Afghan women and children. And we look forward to working with her to promote those goals.
Thank you. Perhaps just a change of topic, looking at you did mention trade as being one of the issues that you wanted to look at. And I mean, how do you see the investment environment in Indonesia now? And has enough been done to ensure a fair playing field for US companies, given well-publicized issues in the past? I mean, I think in the previous call we had with Ambassador Donovan, you know, we were still talking about Freeport at that point. So yeah, I'd be very interested to get your view. And obviously now we have high-tech companies as well, and sometimes a dispute over, you know, taxes and that type of thing. So I'd be very interested to get your view on the investment environment now.
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned in my remarks, I was really very surprised that the bilateral trade is only about $30 billion annually. It should be much bigger than that. Given that, you know, we're the third and fourth largest populations on the globe, given the strength of the Indonesian economy, I think there is enormous potential. And I do appreciate that the government has made efforts to undertake regulatory reform by give them full credit for it. But from my perspective, I think more needs to be done. And we look forward to working with relevant ministries here to make sure that they make a stronger effort to remove some of the trade impediments that we have had, that not only US companies, but foreign companies have had to face, such as very onerous licensing requirements, restrictions on cross-border data flows. So there's a lot more work left, and I want to work with our private sector and with the relevant ministries here to make sure that the challenges are addressed adequately. I mean, we do have one great opportunity coming up to address some of these issues, which is the Trade and Investment Framework Agreement talks. The 18th round will take place later this year. And I think reflecting the commitment, a strong commitment of both governments to expand our trade relationship, the TIFA talks will be held at the ministerial level for the first time in many years. And I think that does demonstrate our determination to find solutions to some of the impediments that foreign companies have faced here. Obviously, in order to attract investment, you need a regulatory environment that eases the burden of doing business here and provides I think, a predictable, consistent investment climate. So it's a work in progress. But I remain optimistic because the potential is just enormous. Potential is there, and there's commitment by both governments to make sure to expand our relationship and give opportunities to the private sectors of both countries to explore opportunities and seize opportunities. So through the upcoming TIFA talks and beyond, I do hope to see an improvement in the environment here.
Thank you. And there was also just a question on any updates on military cooperation. I noticed you did talk about the training that's happened in Sumatra. And in terms of orders of defense equipment, I mean, Indonesia is often linked with big sort of fighter deals and that type of thing. And sometimes it's hard to keep up, but I just wondered whether there's anything you could share with us in terms of cooperation and orders on defense equipment.
Sure, as I mentioned, we are Indonesia's largest military partner, have over 230 joint activities annually. That includes joint exercises like the ones that you just mentioned, but also personnel exchanges, training. That's some exciting programs between our two militaries. And one of the things that I have been struck by during my time here is the strong mutual respect between our two militaries and their strong interest in working together even during the hardest times of the pandemic. So, I mean, to be honest, I was very cautious about the Garuda Shield exercise because it meant bringing so many people into Indonesia. I wanted to be respectful of the difficult COVID situation that Indonesia was facing. This was during the Delta variant spread, the worst times. So I was very cautious, but I agreed to support the exercise because I could sense in the two militaries, through all ranks until to the top leadership, that there was very strong commitment to following through with joint activities such as Garuda Shield. Because I think there is mutual respect and there's belief that by working together, we will improve our capabilities together. And the exercise was, I mean, incredibly successful. And I think it brought great benefits to the both militaries. I think the Indonesian public appreciated the US commitment to working with the Indonesian military. So I'm very optimistic about the future of our military partnership. And we are dedicated to providing some of the world's best defense technology to Indonesia, including F-16 fighters, Apache helicopters, C-130s. And obviously, defense equipment is a big part of defense cooperation, and we are totally committed to making sure that Indonesia has access to some of the best technologies everywhere. I should mention that in terms of focus for our two militaries' activities, I mean, it's broad ranging, but I think particularly important that they're focused on areas like humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. As you know, I mean, this region is not immune from major disasters, and I think it's important. And we have shown this throughout decades that U.S. military can provide really valuable urgent assistance. So I think it's great that the two militaries are continuing to work on their capabilities in that regard. There's also efforts to build PKO capabilities, peacekeeping operations capabilities. And very importantly for Indonesia and for this region is our work to strengthen Indonesia's maritime security capabilities. So that is a very important ongoing effort.
Thank you. We have a couple of questions on North Korea. I may hold back on those just to stay on a couple of Indonesia topics first, if that's okay, and then we'll come back to one from Tegu Santosa and also our Seoul Bureau. Actually, we're very keen to ask you something. But I've got a question from James Castle first. Many in the region, including James, think the US withdrawal from TPP was a tragic mistake. What are the prospects of the US rejoining, and is the current administration considering this at all?
Thanks very much, James. So one thing I want to emphasize is that the withdrawal from the TPP, and I think there are many different opinions about whether that was a good move or not. But one thing I want to emphasize is that that did not in any way undermine or weaken our commitment to resolve, to promote free trade. I think to the contrary, I think Washington has been very clear that the United States remains deeply committed to promoting free trade everywhere. And that has not changed and will not change. I really can't comment on prospects for any decision to rejoin TPP. At the moment, I think I will have to defer to my colleagues in Washington to answer the question. But I think, as I emphasized in talking about our interest in improving or expanding bilateral trade with Indonesia, I think that applies more broadly to the entire region. I mean, I think the U.S. commitment to the region, U.S. interest in the region, a big part of that is our economic engagement. So TPP or not, I think we're going to do everything possible to deepen our economic partnerships with countries in the region.
Thank you. Just a quick question around, you did talk about climate change being another sort of key issue. Is there anything you can tell us about the kind of green financing or green deals in the works to support Indonesia's carbon reduction efforts, which, you know, it has been, Indonesia seems to be trying to make them more ambitious. And around that, I also wondered whether there was any update on a potential Tesla investment, if you knew anything around that.
I'm saying potential what investment?
Tesla, it's been talked about before.
Yeah. So former Secretary of State John Kerry, who, as you know, is the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, has been deeply engaged with Minister Luhut and other senior officials in the Indonesian government. And we also have a bilateral climate working group, and under it, 4 task forces focused on key areas in climate. So it's a robust dialogue, and I think a very productive effort. And part of that dialogue involves financing or financial support. I don't have anything concrete to announce for you, but it's very much a part of our ongoing dialogue with Indonesia, and I expect that there will be concrete initiatives to provide financial support. On Tesla, I know I've heard that there's been interest about possible Tesla investment. I don't have anything to announce. I will say personally, I think it would be very exciting to see Tesla do something here in Indonesia.
Okay, and just to follow up around that, the Indonesia's Sovereign Wealth Fund, there was also some talk about US investment in that. Is that something you have any updates on?
No, Ed, unfortunately, I don't have any update on possible involvement in the Sovereign Wealth Fund. I think it's a topic for discussion in our ongoing dialogue on many economic issues.
Okay, yeah, I see that's one that Aris from Bloomberg has just followed up on to see if there was an intention to cooperate on the Sovereign Wealth Fund. But,
But I'd say, I don't have anything to announce, but we recognize that it is a major initiative for the Indonesian government. And so, you know, we are talking to them about what might be possible.
Thank you. Just if it's possible for you to put your North Korea hat on quickly, we have had a lot of interest in North Korea, particularly given this missile that was hypersonic missile that seemed to be tested as part of its strategic weapons program. So we've had a couple of questions from that, really around what it means for their effort to reopen dialogue and where things stand on that effort, because as we understand it, North Korea's noting that North Korea, is it ready to take the US offer and sit down to talk essentially?
Yeah, thanks very much. So obviously we are deeply concerned about these recent missile launches, including the one that took place just yesterday. You know, these missile launches are a violation of multiple UN Security Council resolutions. They're destabilizing to the region. They're a threat to countries around North Korea. So we are deeply concerned, and I know that others in the region share our concerns. But that does not deter us from continuing to pursue a diplomatic path forward. In fact, we are strongly committed to finding a diplomatic path to complete the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. That has not changed at all. And these missile activities do not change our determination, weaken our determination. We are waiting to hear back from Pyongyang. As you know, we have made a number of approaches to the DPRK and have proposed dialogues on a wide range of topics, but we haven't heard back, and we hope to hear back soon. Another very important part of our North Korea effort is the close communication and coordination that we enjoy with allies and key partners in the region, particularly the Republic of Korea and Japan. In fact, as soon as we heard the news of the missile launch, the latest missile launch, I was on the phone with my Japanese and South Korean counterparts. My South Korean counterpart is in fact coming to Jakarta so that we can have more detailed talks tomorrow. So that tight coordination will continue throughout.
And actually, there was another question around that from Jaime Song Yo saying, is the US position on providing humanitarian aid still unchanged?
Yeah, no, we would like to have an opportunity to provide humanitarian assistance. We know there are urgent needs in the DPRK. The people of North Korea need assistance. So we would like to pursue appropriate humanitarian assistance initiatives. So that has not changed. I think the US government's consistent position has been that we want to keep humanitarian efforts separate from political, whether it be our efforts towards denuclearization negotiations or whatever. And we want to be able to help the people of North Korea.
Thank you. Kevin O'Rourke is asking, well, what are the prospects for US ratification of the Law of the Sea Convention?
It's difficult for me to comment.
You're obviously asking the right thing there, Kevin. Okay, thank you.
I should say, I mean, sort of separate from the question of whether we would actually ratify, Congress would actually ratify the Law of the Sea Convention. I mean, we have a very strong commitment to international law in general, and we want to make sure to protect important rights like freedom of navigation and overflight. And we do object to any country taking expansionist, aggressive, excessive activities and behavior in our oceans. So that has not changed, and that's a separate matter from the ratification issue.
Okay. A question from Lana Lubis asking, I think we've Lana, I think you're sharing a screen or something. Is the current US aid Indonesia country strategy available? Can we switch off that screen sharing?
I'm sorry, the USAID country strategy?
USAID Indonesia country strategy, is that available?
I believe so.
Okay.
But I will double check and my staff can get back to the questioner.
Yeah, we're seeing quite a lot of what's in your Lana. If you could switch off, I think you must have switched on screen sharing or something. Just a question from Mark Winkle. The embassy will soon start working with a new team at America. As one of the founders of At America, he's curious to hear what do you expect from At America as it begins a second decade?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I'm a huge fan of At America. I think it's a wonderful facility. And I hope we can soon start to do more in-person activities there. But as I mentioned in my remarks, we have been able to do quite a bit virtually during the pandemic. So we will continue to be active in using At America facilities virtually. And then as soon as we can transition to more in-person live activities, we will do so. It's really, Mark is probably more familiar with the facility than I am, but it's a wonderful venue to hold different types of events, including hosting speaker events, concerts, etc. So I'm excited about the prospect that we will soon reach a point where we can do more live activities at America.
A question from Tracy D. VNA. What activities, initiatives will the US cooperate with Indonesia as its ASEAN-US coordinatory country role to boost ASEAN-US relations, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we're very excited that Indonesia will be a country chair, as well as the chair of the ASEAN process in 2023. And we look forward to working closely with them on many important initiatives, including ones that I mentioned. I mean, the US has submitted a proposal for us to enhance cooperation with ASEAN in a number of different areas, including health, environment, and digital economy, infrastructure. So we hope to be able to work closely with Indonesia to advance those efforts.
Thank you. A question from Resti at the South China Morning Post. In November, an Indonesian delegation met with the Trump administration and where they scored a $750 million infrastructure commitment for Indonesia. Does this commitment still stand under the Biden administration?
I'm not sure which commitment they are referring to. I mean, I'll say in general, we want to work with Indonesia. We want to support their infrastructure needs and projects. There's, of course, the Development Finance Corporation that actually set up an office in Indonesia because we do see Indonesia as a key recipient country for our assistance in infrastructure development. So that has not changed through the administration change in Washington. There's also sort of longer term programs under USAID, which are relevant to infrastructure development as well. And those efforts will continue.
Thank you. So, I mean, under the Biden administration, he's talked about relentless diplomacy. Does that mean you have to double your work rate or something? Or is that a sort of, has that changed? Has that visibly changed how things are happening now? And I also just wondered how, I mean, China has talked about, you know, its wolf diplomacy, it's getting out there on the front foot. Is that changing for you, I wonder, in terms of an ambassador in such a strategic region?
Yes, I work very long hours, that's for sure. No, I think the President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, and other senior officials have made very clear that the U.S. will be engaged diplomatically particularly in this region. I think there is great emphasis placed on the Indo-Pacific region. We will be relentless in pursuing diplomacy in this important region. a big part of that is, of course, rebuilding, revitalizing alliances and partnerships in the region. And I think that effort has gone strong from the very beginning of the Biden administration. As you mentioned in the intro, I had the privilege of sort of overseeing our Asia Bureau through the period of the transition. So I know personally, having been involved in many senior level deliberations and discussions in Washington, that there's real focus on diplomacy in the region and sort of really working hard to rebuild our friendships, partnerships, and alliances in the region.
And also, just as a follow-up, I mean, in terms of how the US sees human rights in Indonesia, perhaps, and you know, in the region, I mean, is that going to be a new focus again? And I mean, we obviously have Papua here, which is a sensitive issue for Indonesia and for a lot of other countries. So how do you see the issue of human rights in Indonesia and perhaps in Papua in particular?
So President Biden has very clear that promoting human rights will be a key priority for US foreign policy. And I think he is determined to make sure that we're doing everything possible to promote, protect human rights for all around the globe. We have, I think, a deep dialogue with Indonesia on issues related to human rights. I mean, I think, you know, we have concerns, and those concerns have been well documented in our annual human rights report, which, as you know, is a public document. I think what's encouraging is that we do have a very open and serious dialogue with our Indonesian partners about our concerns with respect to some human rights challenges that are here. In terms of Papua, I think you know that the US does support Indonesia's territorial integrity, including in Papua and West Papua. We do not support separatism anywhere. And of course, we support sort of greater respect for protection of fundamental human rights, including freedom of expression. And in that regard, we have had concerns about certain restrictions on fundamental freedoms in Papua, and also about sort of the use of overly expansive sedition laws. So we want to encourage the Indonesian government to engage in serious, honest dialogue with stakeholders and local communities in Papua area to address some of the concerns that they have about the human rights situation in Papua.
Thank you. A question from Lucy Godot of Agence France Presse. Indonesia has seen the recent visits in Asia of Kamala Harris and Blinken have actually bypassed Indonesia. And, you know, I suppose, you know, is there a concern this is for Indonesia? This is a bit of a snub, and when will the next high-level visit be?
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. So I have heard the concern that somehow Indonesia was bypassed by the Vice President and the Secretary of Defense, Austin. I can honestly say that this was not a bypass or dismissal of Indonesia's importance. The main reason why the Vice President and Secretary of Defense Austin did not come to Indonesia was we wanted to be, again, respectful of the difficult COVID situation that Indonesia was facing at that time. As you know, those visits happened at the height of the rapid spread of the Delta variant. And our senior officials travel with very large delegations. And we just thought it would be inappropriate for us to be imposing that type of situation on Indonesia when they were, you know, working so hard to deal with the pandemic situation. But that doesn't mean we are not engaging in senior level conversations and exchanges. As I mentioned, Foreign Minister Retno has had 2 visits to the US in the past couple of months, has had very substantive engagements with with Secretary Blinken and other senior officials in Washington. And in fact, in New York just recently, when Secretary was meeting with his ASEAN counterparts, the only person who was there in person was Foreign Minister Retno. So senior level engagements continue very robustly, and I expect that we will see more and more of the senior level engagements going forward. But of course, we have to remember that Indonesia will be hosting the G20, and that will bring a lot of very senior people to Indonesia.
Thank you. A question from Xinjin Li, who's from China, representing herself. We have 5 Chinese workers missing from Indonesia last week. Does human rights protection also include foreign workers or only US citizens?
No, as I mentioned, I think our interest, our commitment to protecting human rights is for everybody, not just for US citizens. No. This is why we're so concerned about some of the things we're seeing in places like Xinjiang and Hong Kong, where we know that basic human rights are being assaulted. Right? So this is not about just protecting American citizens.
Thank you. Okay, well, we've got a thank you from Lana Lewis for sending the USAID website. Okay, well, we don't have further questions. I'd like to thank you very much for, actually we do have one more question from Xinjin Li. Any aid suggestions for me? I'll leave that one with you, but thank you very much for joining us today. It's been very insightful, and particularly during this difficult time when we haven't been able to meet each other as we normally would do. So hopefully, as things do get better, so we can all meet in person. And yeah, because it's I think from a journalist perspective, the US relation remains one of the big ones, and we'd like to have the US ambassador on as early as possible during his tenure. So thank you very much for joining us today. Just for our other members, we were due to have Trade Minister Lutfi on tomorrow, but it's actually been rescheduled now until the 8th of October at 2 p.m. Jakarta time. So you won't have the JFCC for 2 days in a row, I'm afraid. But anyway, well, thank you very much, Ambassador.
All right, thank you very much, Ed. Good to be with you and your members.
Thanks, everybody.